Hello and welcome back for another GiantSlayerTV Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top champions for rank play in patch 12.9. For a patch that wasn't meant to be balanced, the overall meta actually did end up in a good spot. There's a diverse amount of champions to play and flex compositions are still doing well. AP boards slightly struggle, but plenty of AP champions are strong. Point is, they've done a great job at upping the variance and fun factor of the game without compromising the balance too much. As for our top 10, expect to see a lot of familiar champions from our previous list with an emphasis towards the late game with 4 and 5 cost units. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT shows and turns with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off our top 10 is somewhat of a surprise champion as we have Ashe coming in at number 10. Having Ashe in the top 10 is surprising for a few reasons because throughout the mid-set, Ashe has only been playable on a few occasions. What we're saying is that, well, Ashe has been mediocre in most of the mid-set patches. The other reason specific to this patch is that Syndicate was nerfed, yet somehow Ashe with a Syndicate board is doing well. Why is that? The minor reason is the free tome of traits that has made hitting any vertical synergy a lot easier, including Syndicates. This means hitting 7 Syndicate or even 4 snipers is doable more often, meaning Ashe reroll can actually scale into the late game. Clockwork being prevalent in the meta opens up options with Ashe, Jhin, and Orianna, which helps with transitions when the early game goes poorly for Ashe. Then there's the absence of Renata due to the Morello nerfs. That's not to say Renata is completely gone from the meta or unplayable, but the most common way to itemize Renata was with Morellonomicon. It helped add a lot of damage over time in addition to the healing reduction and debuff her ability inherently applies. Without Renata, fringe AD carries like Ashe are able to thrive. Finally, Ashe and Zyra are actually amazing against a lot of late game boards. Ashe applies attack speed slow that's good against AD champions like Sivir or Draven, while Zyra is often able to stun the enemy backline. Both being 2 cost units is easy to have them upgraded early, and then hitting the 3-star power spike puts them way ahead of any mid-game 1-star 4 costs. All in all, Ashe has a lot going for this patch, though she does struggle against burst damage. Also being a 2 cost unit, she doesn't have as good a scaling into the late game compared to 4 and 5 cost units. Next up is another 2 cost unit and the first of multiple Clockwork champions on our list, as Zilean is flying in at number 9. Time sure flies when you're having fun, and what's more fun than watching Zilean tossing time bombs around and having them flung into the enemy? Well, we definitely want to highlight the Zilean reroll board. Time flies. The actual reason for Zilean being in the top 10 doesn't necessarily have to do with that composition. Mainly, we're looking at his 2 synergies and the power he brings to the early game, plus the safety net he provides late game for backline carries. Let's break each of those points down briefly. Zilean has both Clockwork and Innovator, 2 synergies doing quite well in the meta, especially for any flex players out there. We'll be seeing several champions with those tags later on in the list, but the Spark Notes version is both our solid foundations to build a board around with good champions. Next, Zilean is a 2 cost unit, meaning you can upgrade him relatively easily in the early game. With that, his tags and having CC, he's a great champion to stabilize your board with. Finally, towards the mid to late game, if you're worried about any pesky assassins or units getting into the backline carry, then don't worry. Zilean will prioritize his bomb to help keep your carry alive. Considering how common both of Zilean's traits are, it's not unlikely to have him on your board. And of course, the Time Flies composition is actually decent, albeit niche since it's countered by Enchanters. Overall though, Zilean is one of the most well-rounded units in the game and comes at the cheap price of only 2 gold. Another synergy that's the talk of the town is Enchanter, which the champion coming in at number 8 is well known for. That champion is Senna. Whether or not buffing Enchanters is a balance issue, the fact is they buffed it to a ridiculous level. That has caused the meta to veer towards AD boards more so than AP, but even then, the healing and shields provided by Enchanter is bonkers. In addition to that, Senna was also buffed, making her not only a valuable Enchanter to splash in, but also a fantastic item holder for AD items. Senna also has the Socialite tag, making her even more valuable, so Splash Champions and Socialite is a common synergy to use for flex boards. That means players can utilize Senna as an item holder, Enchanter, and Socialite, or all of the above. Few mid-game champions, particularly 3 cost units, have that kind of flexibility in the meta. The main issue with Senna is she doesn't scale too well, so her impact basically boils down to her being a trait bot, but that's okay considering both of her synergies are fantastic throughout the game. If you're looking for a solid 3 cost carry to hold on to your AD items with 2 fantastic synergies, we definitely recommend using Senna. Up next, we have Seraphine as the number 7 champion. Well, would you look at that, another champion with Innovator and Socialite as their tags. Anyone noticing a trend towards what the meta is? Seraphine is the splash champion for a number of compositions due to her synergies and the utility her ability brings. Need a 5th Innovator? Seraphine. Want to play Socialite carry? Add in a Seraphine for the Hex. Need AP utility? Seraphine. Okay, that last one is a bit of a stretch because there are quite a few utility champions, but still, healing and doing damage is nothing to scoff at. Overall, we don't have too much to talk about in regards to Seraphine due to her mainly being a splash unit. Toss her onto your board when needed and ignore her otherwise. Definitely a solid champion, but not quite as impactful as champions later on in our top 10. Moving on to the number 6 spot, we're giving it to 2 champions, Sivir and Aurelia. We know, Sivir not being in the top 3? What? Well, that's just the facts of the meta. Strikers are definitely a top tier composition, certainly top 5, but rating the champions individually shows that Sivir is definitely weaker post nerfs. That's where Aurelia dashes in to save the day because the striker duo does a ton of work together, especially since Aurelia was buffed. It should be pointed out that individually, Aurelia can definitely do well without Sivir, particularly in Socialite comps. We're putting the two of them together because they are primarily part of the striker composition more so than anything else. Neither of them are good enough carries for that composition on their own, so we're lumping them together. Sivir dishes out reliable damage while also helping spread the Last Whisper debuff, while Aurelia is on cleanup duty. Strikers are a well-rounded composition in the current meta, as they almost always are, but do especially well against Enchanter-heavy boards. The free tome is also key here because without 6 strikers, Sivir is probably not playable as a carry. But at the end of the day, it's not too difficult to hit 6 strikers, Sivir 2 and Aurelia 2 to make your way into the top 4. The meta needs reliable frontliners to buy time for their carry to do well, and who better to stand behind than the number 5 champion, Braum. Braum's big, strong arms is what every board wants from their frontline. Lots of defensive stats, a decent health pool, and mostly reliable CC. Occasionally, Braum will throw his stun into a random direction that does nothing, but on average, he's going to be way more useful than, say, Alistar. Plus, you can mitigate that issue with good positioning. Crowd control is the main factor as to why Braum gets our frontline spotlight this patch because it's usually reliable and completely necessary. We should also mention that Leona is not a bad option either, but again, the lack of CC is what holds her back compared to Braum. Bodyguard is generally the better frontline synergy because of how AD heavy the meta is, so sorry to say here, there won't be any bruisers in our top 10. Braum isn't the only frontliner, but he's definitely the most contested and most well-rounded in the meta. Coming in at number 4 is Jhin. Throughout set 6, Jhin has been in a weird place. Jhin is somewhat reliable damage, but has had a difficult time being a main carry. Generally, he's just extra damage while providing Clockwork. In 12.9, Jhin has made the transition into a viable late-game damage dealer. Clockwork definitely plays a role here since practically every board wants Orianna, and usually Jhin is the best companion to her, but his damage is also quite good. When positioned well, Jhin can wreck the enemy board and take out the enemy carry effectively. Also, any clumped up compositions such as the Enchanter Lulu board get absolutely wrecked by Jhin. All in all, there isn't a lot to talk about with Jhin because he's rather basic. He does damage and he's a Clockwork unit. Simple, but effective. Up next is number 3 champion, we have another AD carry, Jace. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise. After all, we've been hyping up Innovator a lot. Jace has a lot going for him outside of just being an Innovator, though we admit much of his value does come down to that synergy. Jace adds much needed scaling to an Innovator board and can fill multiple roles. The first role is, of course, as an AD carry in the backline. Reliable, good damage with items, and relatively safe. Then there's utility Jace that can be used to buff up other carries quite well. Finally, Jace helps a lot for any board struggling with a weak frontline. In general, this is one of the best roles for Jace to fill because frontline is so important and the best frontliner, Braum, is heavily contested. Jace can shore up that problem quite effectively, even as a 1-star unit. Turns out a champion with a tag transformer is quite versatile at flexing into various roles, making him one of the more valuable 5 costs in the current meta. Speaking of 5 costs, the champion coming in number 2 is Silco. Silco may no longer be the best splash champion in the meta, but at least he's the second best. Mastermind enables quite a few champions, especially late game units like Victor, while Scholar received a huge buff and is a common splash trait for a lot of comps. On top of that, Silco's ability was buffed in 12.9 and is better than ever at winning rounds or occasionally throwing them. But there's another champion even more reliable than Silco, even more dangerous, flexible, and splashable. That champion is, of course, Orianna, as she comes in as our number 1 pick for patch 12.9. We've been fans of Orianna for most of the set, but in the mid-set, she has truly shined with her utility and synergies. In 12.9, they made her even better by cutting her mana cost down by a whopping 50 and buffing her damage and shields. Oh, and also they buffed Enchanter. Of the entire roster, no other champion has quite the same impact on a game as Orianna. Reliable damage, CC, and really useful synergies all from one champion is a bit bonkers. She's definitely overtuned for this patch, and had this not been a for fun meta, we likely would have seen her tuned down in a B patch. As is, that's not the case, so have fun climbing the ladder with Orianna 2 on your board. Alright folks, that's all we have for you for today. There's no honorable mentions for this patch because, quite frankly, there are too many champions to mention. Just to list a few, there's Victor, Jinx, Draven, Kai'Sa, Echo, Leona, and quite a few more that have a lot of impact on the game. With so many viable champions, it's impossible to narrow it down to just a few. That's quite remarkable as, again, this patch was meant to be mostly for fun, which means balance should have been off kilter. Not too shabby for what is basically the end of Set 6. Let us know in the comment section below what your top 10 champions are for patch 12.9. Thank you for watching. If you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.